Are you struggling to catch live mullet for bait? Hi, my name's Roger Osborne. In today's video, I'm going to fix that. I'll be sharing with you some really important things that make a massive difference when it comes to catching live mullet. And then after that, I'm going to go for a fish. I'm super pumped to do that. I'll be teaching you a few tips as well for using live mullet for bait. Stick around to the end for a free PDF download which will outline some vital keys from today's session. If you're enjoying these videos, make sure that you like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's get into it. Now, one of the things when it comes to catching live mullet for bait that I always do, I don't really want to do it in strong wind and a breeze. So that's a big influence to me. I will pick a part of the lake that has a nice shallow sandy bottom where it's not too windy. Today I've got a southerly wind, so that's influenced me in where I'm actually going to go catching mullet. It's not like this is the only spot. I've got heaps of places I can do it, but I don't really want to have the wind ruffling the water and in my face. Now let's just go through some of the basics before we get into the more key points. As you might have seen in a previous video, I love just using a glass salad bowl because they're weighty. You don't have to put any weight in them. And for years I just used to use clear plastic on top like this with an elastic band. But you can also use fly screen mesh, works just as good. And I bought some elastic from a sewing shop and just tied it off to the right length, so I've got a nice elastic thing around there. But you can see here, I went to the local post office, said, do you have any spare elastic bands? They gave me a few and I whacked this together. Now, as I mentioned, you really need to look for places where you've got a nice sandy bottom, where it's not too deep. I like to have the water really only about 5 or 6 centimetres above the top of the trap. I find the mullet go in better than if the water, like for example, if you put this in the trap and you're 30 or 40 centimetres of water over the top, it's just too deep. Mullet like to swim on the surface, and when there's not too much water on top, they kind of just glide over and go in much more easily. So I've got my trap here. The first thing I need to do is actually fill it with water and get a bit of bread and put some bread in there. I'm just going through the basics because I've done this in other videos, but I may as well whack it into this one as well so that it covers everything in the one video. So I got some bread in my pocket. I always buy white bread, and before I put it in the trap, I wet it and actually mush it up a little bit like porridge. So I'm going to do that now. I'm just going to walk out into the water here. It's pretty shallow. In fact, like it's really shallow. So I'm going to have to walk out a fair way. So all I'm going to do is actually just dip this in, get a bit of water in there. I'm just going to let that sit there, and I'll show you what I'm going to do with this bread. Now, I've wet the bread, but can you see what I'm doing? I'm just pushing my thumb through it. Really, I don't want it to be in huge lumps. I don't mind a few pieces, but you'll see what happens when I put it in. So I've just mushed the bread up like that. It's like a little bread bomb. I'll plop it in there. You can actually see it just looks like a lump at the moment. But when I get my hand in there and give it a bit of a shake, look at that now. You can see it's like a cloud of all different size pieces of bread. How awesome. So what I need to do now is walk out until I actually get to the water that's deep enough to have that much above my trap. And I'm going to put it in, and then once I've done that, there's a few things I want to teach you and tell you. So I'm going to whack it out there, see if any mullet come around, but at the same time, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to be having a chat. Okay, it's going to get a little bit deeper now. So I think we're just about going to be right. No, not yet. Wow. Taking a while to get into water that's deep enough. I might come over this way a bit. Yeah, it's starting to drop off here a little bit. So I'm going to whack this in the water. You want to make sure that you get rid of any air bubbles that are trapped just by turning it around and letting the air bubbles come out the hole, giving it a little tap. Make sure that the plastic is taut. And I'm going to give it a little bit of a Just a little bit of a stir, and I'm going to walk back. You don't have to get too far away, but you don't want to be too close to the trap. You really want to be probably at least 10 metres away. Now I need to attract some mullet to that trap. There will be a little bit of bread that's coming up out of the trap anyway, but I'm going to get a bit of bread out of my pocket. I can actually see mullet already. Wow, they've moved in. Okay, now let's time this. I want to see exactly how long it takes to get some mullet in that trap, because one thing I've definitely found, and this is a really important key, whenever you go to catch mullet, getting those first mullet in the trap is the hardest thing and takes the longest. Sometimes you've got to burley for a while, you've got to be really patient. But once a couple of mullet get into the trap, what happens is they swim around and they kick their tail and they become natural burley machines. They stir up all the bread and the bread comes up out of the hole like a funnel, and the mullet just get into a feeding frenzy and they see their mates in there and they start going in. So the biggest tip I can give you, once you've been patient and got a few mullet in there, is you always leave at least 2 mullet in the trap. Now I'm going to turn around because I want to see what's happening over here. There's definitely mullet around my trap at the moment, but I don't have any mullet in the trap to stir the bread up. And what happens is when there's no mullet in the trap, you might stir it up when you're over there and then walk away, but the bread just all sort of settles and sits on the bottom of the trap. And it really takes a mullet going in there to start stirring it all up. So I want to time and see how long it takes, because what I've actually done is I brought 2 mullet with me. I've got my own mullet show. I brought 2 mullet because I caught some mullet earlier, and I'm going to put those mullet in a minute. I'm going to put them in the trap and see how long it takes to get mullet as opposed to having no mullet in the trap. What I normally like to do is I always keep a couple of mullet aside and don't use all of the mullet for bait. I always keep a couple of mullet as my mullet attractors. Now when you're on holidays, that's easy to do because you're not working, you're probably staying near the water and you can do that. It's probably a little bit harder than when you're at home, but if you were at home, you really would need to keep your live mullet in a large bucket with an aerator going, so you can keep them alive obviously, and then don't use them all. If you intend to catch some more and go fishing, always save a couple, because you will save heaps of time by starting off with mullet already in your trap. Now I can actually tell you that there are no mullet in the trap. Even though I can see mullet swimming all around the trap at the moment, I can just see all the white bread there sitting on the bottom. So this is what you normally go through if you have to start off. If this happens to you, it's totally normal. If you come down and you put your trap in the water and you can see mullet there, but they're not going in, don't be discouraged. This morning when I was catching mullet, it took me about 30 or 40 minutes to get the first mullet in the trap. Then once I got some mullet in my trap, I took some out, I left 2 mullet in the trap, put that back out in the water, and within about 2 or 3 minutes my trap was full of mullet, because I already had mullet in there stirring up all the bread. So I'm just going to see, I've lost sight of the trap now. Where is it? Oh no, I can see it. There's a lot of mullet bubbling around it. I can see them swimming over the top of it. But I don't think that there's any mullet in there yet. How do you know when there's actually mullet in your trap? When there's no mullet in there, you can actually see the white of the bread, and it's really still. Once a couple of mullet get in there, you can't see that kind of blanket of white, or the white that's normally in the trap, because the mullet are stirring it up. And as more mullet get in the trap, then it really just looks like this grey bubbling situation. All this time we've been here so far, I've seen a heap of mullet there, but I still can't see any in the trap. Now to show you that there's plenty of mullet there, I'm actually going to chuck a bit of bread in the water and they will bubble up. I'll throw it near the trap. It's going to wet it a little bit, otherwise I can't get the distance. Okay, that's landed just near my trap. You watch what happens. There's already some mullet around that. Oh, look at that. See all those splashes? In fact, that bread won't last very long. Yeah, it's getting hammered. I don't want to do that too much because I want them to eat what's in my trap. All right, so they've eaten that bread already. I can still see no mullet in my trap, and it's been 8 minutes that's been sitting there. Now, there are no fish in that trap, and you can see that the bread is basically all just sitting on the bottom of the trap. But when I put a couple of fish in there, it'll be a totally different story, and it will really vitalise the other mullet to come in. So how about I go and get the 2 mullet that I brought down and put them in the trap, and we see how long it takes to get mullet in the trap. You know, there was a lot, we could see there were plenty of mullet here around the trap, but none were going in. So I've actually put 2 mullet in here. A little bit hard to see them because the bread's clouding it up a bit, but I'm going to time how long it takes to get some mullet in here now that I've put a couple of fish in here, and they will be doing all the work. I'm going to get out of the way. Oops, there's a big bit of bread coming out there. I might just chuck a little bit of, I can see some little, yeah, the mullet are there. Yep. I'll chuck a bit of bread and then be able to see them bubbling up with that bit of bread. But they're near the trap. Now those guys that are in the trap should start doing a little bit of action. I'm going to time it. Alrighty. Let's see how long it takes. We've started off with 2 mullet. Let's see if we can upgrade. Now, from where I'm standing, I'm a good 10 metres from the trap. I can actually see that the bread is moving in the trap. So I think at this point, there's probably more mullet in the trap than the 2 that I put in there. And it's been in the water for 1.5 minutes at the moment. It's going to wait a little bit longer because once it really starts bubbling, you know, you can end up with a lot of mullet in the trap. Just got to stand nice and still and not be too close. Now the trap has been in the water for 4 minutes and I've seen lots of mullet around the trap, but just a little bit of detail. I think where I've placed the trap, it's a fraction too deep. It really is important how much water you have above the trap. So those 2 mullet are still in there, even though there's heaps of mullet have been swimming around it. But at this point, I think I've got too much water, so I'm going to bring this into slightly shallower water. Actually, it's a bit shallower just here, so I'm actually going to really put this where there's not too much water above the top of the trap at all, which I think will make a big difference. And I'm going to take a step back, and those guys in there are swimming around, they're stirring up the bread beautifully. So it just shows you there's a little bit of tweaking to get it just right. And then once you find, so I can see the mullet, there you can see the lines, the fish are actually already swimming in towards where the trap is. And I've put it in slightly shallower water, which I think will make a difference. So let's just see how that goes. In fact, I think something's already got in there because I could just see a lot of action going on inside the trap, but I want to wait a couple more minutes, so we'll see how long that takes. There's some quite large mullet there. I don't really want to get the trap out if I've only got 1 or 2 extra mullet. Man, it's really bubbling. So I'm just going to wait not much longer, maybe only another 60 seconds, and then I think I should check that trap. There's a lot of action going on. Yeah, that bread is really getting stirred around in that trap. Oh, look at that. Now, when you're watching your mullet trap, especially if you're using an elastic band and plastic like I've done since I was a kid, there's a point where you can have too many mullet in the trap, and all of those mullets swimming around and all of that power can just pop the plastic and the elastic band off the top. I mean, it's not much of an issue, but it's something you need to be aware of. You know, you really want to grab the trap when you've maybe got a dozen or so mullet in the trap. So it's one of those things where you just got to wait for the right moment. Okay, so I'm going to wander over. I've got to get here reasonably quickly. Okay, so there's a few more mullet in there now. Not heaps, but there are some beautiful bait mullet in there. Now there's some extra mullet in this trap, but as my videographer was walking up to the trap, you can see just one side of the trap popped off where the elastic band is, and about half a dozen nice mullets escaped out the side. So that is a little trap. Doesn't always happen, it's not a major deal, but sometimes that can happen. That's why you've got to stand close by and watch it. This is just a really simple method. It's obviously my go-to method. It's what I've done since I was a little kid. So easy just to have a glass bowl. It can double as a salad bowl at home and a mullet bowl. So if I whack this down again, some more mullet, now that I've got a nice turbocharger in there, some more mullet will go in really easily. I might whack it back in and have a look. I'm just going to put my finger in the water just to see how deep it is above the trap. All right, so I'm touching the mullet trap. It's to there on my finger. That's about 6 centimetres of water over the top of this trap. I'd had it out before. There was mullet everywhere and they weren't going in, and I just realised the water's too deep. It was probably more like 10 centimetres. So that's only like that much difference. But by bringing the trap into slightly shallower water and just leaving a relatively small margin over the top, the mullets seem to swim up over the top. It's easier for them to get in. And as soon as I made that adjustment, there were fish going in there within about a minute and a half. So that's just another little thing to think about when you're putting your trap in the water. Burley the mullet up, but don't have it out there too deep. You really only want a little bit of water over the top of the trap. Now, before I take some of these guys down to the edge of the lake where there's some deep water, I just want to share a few things with you guys. Basically what my experience was this morning in catching mullet. So I wanted to get a few live bait this morning, so I came down to the lake. I came down to this location, threw a bit of bread in the water. 5 or 10 minutes, I didn't see any mullet action, so I went to a different part of the lake. Same type of area, a nice sandy bottom, not too deep. I threw some bits of bread out in the water to see if I could attract some mullet. No mullet. Then I sometimes catch them in the harbour in town, so I drove into town. Went to the harbour, I burleyed up in the harbour, no mullet. So I tried 3 spots, and then I thought I'm going to come past this spot again and just spend a few more minutes. So I came down here, and when I first threw bread in the water, it didn't look like anything. I probably had to wait a good 15 minutes, but then I just started to see a few signs. So it took a little while for the mullet to come around. And then I thought, beauty, I can see some mullet there. So I got my trap ready, put my trap in the water, ready to go, but then I had to wait a good half an hour or so to get the first mullet in the trap. Once that happened, within 5 or 10 minutes I had all the mullet that I needed. I put the trap out a couple more times and it just loaded up straight away. Once I could keep some of those live mullet in the trap, it was really quick. So I've done a bit of an exercise with you in this video. I've put that trap out with no mullet in it. It sat there for 8 minutes with mullet all around it. And eventually I would have caught some if I kept throwing some little bits of bread near the trap and been patient. Some would have gone in and then I would have got a roll on. But then when I put the 2 mullet that I brought with me into the trap, it certainly sped things up a whole lot. Anyways, time to go fishing. So I'm down by the lake. I've come to a different part of the lake to cast my mullet out. Wanted to come somewhere where I could actually reach the deep water and cast over the edge of the weed banks beyond the drop-off onto the sand, which is beyond the weeds. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. The weather's been a bit changeable. It looks like there could be a storm rolling in, so I don't really mind that. So I've got my, I've got a few different rods, but essentially I'm just using, I think my braid is about 15-pound line with a 15-pound fluorocarbon leader, small ball sinker to a swivel, Then I've just got a leader of about 40 centimetres or 15 inches to a size 4/0 octopus hook. Now, the size hook that you use for live mullet can vary depending on the size of the mullet. If the mullet are bigger, then you need a bigger hook, because you want to make sure that the barb of the hook is well exposed and so that it can easily catch onto a fish when it bites. So I'm going to toss, I've got 3 lines, I'm going to toss them out into the deep water, and what I'm hoping to catch is some nice flathead. Bream also love mullet, especially when they're not too big. I actually caught a bream yesterday on a live mullet. Actually, the mullet had died, so I threw it back out again dead. The bream was 43 centimetres long and it weighed 1.2 kilos. It was an absolute beast of a bream, and it was 15 centimetres deep. Probably just about the biggest bream I've ever caught. It was amazing, and it took a whole mullet. So I've grabbed a live mullet, I've got him here. He's just a good general size for flathead, etc. I'm holding on to him tight because I don't want to drop him. There's a couple of different ways you can rig these, but I put the hook in between these 2 fins, the dorsal fin and the next fin, about 1/3 of the way down the body of the mullet, straight through like that. And you'll be able to see when I put him in the water how much energy he's got. He's got heaps of energy. So that's a cracking bait for a whole lot of fish. In this particular spot, if I was just to stand here and toss my line out, I probably wouldn't land in a good area because there's quite large weed banks here. And if I cast my line out and my bait lands in the middle of all the weeds, that's not going to be very good. The fish is just going to get lost in the weeds. The big fish aren't going to find it. I actually need to get out past the weeds and into the deeper water. So I'm going to have to walk out a bit to achieve that, because it's pretty shallow close to shore. So I'm walking out a little bit, and then I'm going to flick him out beyond the weeds, and I'll be confident he'll land in a good spot. See, I still put in a pretty strong cast. There's no way you'd be able to get there if you were standing on the shore. Now I just set the drag so that the fish could pull line if something grabs it, but not too easily. Now I'm going to grab another rod. This rod here is actually it's my light beach rod, but I often like to use it in a lake, especially if I've got to cast a little bit of a distance to get out to deep water. It's actually an advantage to use a slightly longer fishing rod, slightly heavier. You can use a slightly heavier sinker and get your bait right out where you need to get it. So I'm going to grab a mullet when I can catch one. Gotcha. This mullet's a little bit bigger than the last one. I'm just mindful not to lose him and drop him in the water. He's a bit bigger. All right, so I'm hooking him the same way. And I'm going to walk out and toss him maybe 10 metres to the right of where my other line is. So I've put in quite a big cast there, but I'm really confident that my bait is in a good zone. I'm not here to just muck around. I want to catch dinner. Whoops. There's an important thing that I'd like to mention, whether you're new to fishing for flathead or you've been doing it for a number of years, and specifically I'm talking about land-based, is you really need to understand the terrain that you're fishing in. In a particular lake or river, you need to know where the water's deep, where the water's shallow, where the bottom is all weed, where the bottom is sand. It's really important. One of the best places to fish for flathead is on what people call a drop-off, where the shallow water transitions into deep water, and very often you have weed banks along a drop-off, and the flathead lay in the sand on the edge of the weed banks. They also travel up onto the weeds sometimes. But the reason that's really good is these weed banks are an amazing place for small fish and prawns and all sorts of foods that flathead feed on, and other fish like bream and snapper and mulloway, etc. So I'm always really having a close look at the terrain in an area where I'm going to fish. If you're not sure what you're looking for, Google Earth is a really good tool. You can use Google Earth to get on top of a a lake or any particular waterway, and you'll be able to see, and you can zoom in and out, you'll be able to see where the shallow parts are, where the deep parts are. You'll be able to see where there are what we call drop-offs, so that you can pick spots on the shore where you could actually cast your line and land in those sweet spots. So I think it's massive, because I never just go to a lake and just not even know what the bottom. I always know exactly the terrain I'm casting into, how deep it is, and I don't want to be landing my bait in the middle of a bunch of weed where it's just going to get lost in the weeds and the fish aren't going to find it. So I really encourage you to do that. If you're new to fishing, it's not difficult, especially when you use maps and Google Earth, etc., and then you can pick a location and you can be confident that your bait is going into a good spot. I mean, we've gone to all the effort to catch some lovely fresh bait. We want to give ourselves the best chance of catching some quality fish. Now, 1 minute the sun is blazing and 1 minute it's really dark and gloomy today. Well, that's cool. It's nice that it's not raining at the moment. So I'm just going to relax here now. I've got my beautiful live mullet out there. Those live baits are great because there's that movement, and fish pick up signals in the water. They can sense when there's distressed fish or there's prey there. So that's why live bait, one of the reasons why live bait is so good. Now I just can enjoy the afternoon and wait till I get a bite. I've been getting some bites on this rod. Very often flathead and things, they just sit on your line. Sometimes you pick up your line and there's weight on the end of it. Oh, there's something on here. Doesn't feel huge, but it's obviously taken one of those live mullet. Okay, oh, it's gone near my other line. I want to get it away from my other line. Okay, it's a flathead. So that's one of the things we're actually after with the live mullet. And I can tell without measuring him that he's about 40. He's over 40, maybe 42 centimetres, something like 40, 44. So just a nice eating size flathead. Look, you can see he's actually swallowed that mullet completely. I can't see the hook anywhere. Well, that was my first set, my first 3 baits. So I've got 1 fish so far, still plenty of daylight left. So, you know, I need more than that for dinner though. Actually, I've got a fish. It's probably another flathead. They just sit on it. It's got a bit of fight in it. It's tracking around to the right at the moment. I hope it is another flathead. Woo! Ooh, this is a bigger one. It's a bigger fish than the last one. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful fish, actually. Whoa, look at this. What a cracking flathead. He's a beautiful fish. Look, you can see that mullet. The mullet's still on the line. He's got the hook and he's missed the mullet. When I caught the first flathead, I actually had to you know what happened then, don't you? The line broke. Now that's a beautiful eating size flathead. This fish would be probably maybe 52 centimetres, but just a beautiful eating fish. One of those mullet did it again, so that's two flathead really, with only a few casts. So Very happy with that. And it just goes to show you, you catch those live mullet and you do what I've been explaining. You make sure that you get your bait out beyond the weed bank into the deeper water, and this is what you catch. Now my rod is bending here. That's always a good sign. Oh, yeah, I've got something. Man, I only just threw this line out. I just had that other one with the flathead. Now I've got another fish. What's on this one? Just walking out because he's actually tracking to the left. It doesn't feel huge, but oh well, look at that. Goodness me. Now this is not a flathead, but it's taken a mullet. It's a bream. It's not a massive bream. I'm just going to grab him. You can see that guy. So that's just another example. Bream actually do like mullet. And this guy is undersized. He's probably about 23, 24 centimetres. And the 4-0 hook that I'm using, he had no problem eating that. So that's 2 species so far on the mullet. It's pretty good. This guy can go back to live another day, but it's good to catch. It's great. It's just great catching fish and getting bites. So you can see what a really good bait mullet are, whether they're alive or dead. Even when they die, don't chuck them out. Put them back on and throw them out because they're great bait, dead or alive. There you go. I'm going to let him go for a little swim. Oh, well, that was quick. I've had a number of email questions, and I had one from Marc. G'day, Marc. And Marc was talking about, he mentioned it's a good idea to take rags down the beach to wipe your hands with and stuff, but also how often the seagulls can steal your bait when you've got some pilchards lying on the sand or something. It probably would be a good idea just to cover them in a damp cloth or a rag, and what the seagulls can't see, they can't eat. So I think that's a good idea, Marc. Thanks so much for sending in your question, mate. And if you guys have got any questions, please make sure that you put them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm just keeping my eye on my rods, and I noticed that the line on this one is really taut. I always like to leave a bit of slack in my line. I leave a bit of plenty of slack line because if I look at my line and it's out straight like that, I know something's grabbed it. So I always leave my line slack. It's just one way of telling if I've had a bite, but there's something, this line is out straight, so it tells me there's something on the other end. Yep, there's definitely more weight than a mullet, that's for sure. Yep, could be another lovely flathead. Just going to walk out a bit, see where my line is. It's coming into the side actually, they often do that. Yeah, we've definitely got a fish there. Okay, something's caught on my sinker. I've definitely got a flathead. Not as big as the last one, but certainly a nice eating fish. Yeah, look at that. That's flathead number 3 on the live mullet. That guy is probably about 45 centimetres, which is just a beautiful size for eating. So I tell you what, they're not bad bait, are they, the old live mullet? Really good. I've got this weird kind of weedy thing caught on my sinker. Some sort of strange alien growth. Look at that. What on earth is that? Somehow my sinker got caught on that. Another email that I received from my Q&A on YouTube was from Robbie in South Africa. G'day, Robbie. I love South Africa. It's an awesome place. Really great beaches, fantastic fishing. And Robbie, you were saying that, sorry, there's a few mozzies here at the moment. You were saying that you've had some good success off the beaches in Durban and you've moved north of Durban, I think north, and you're just struggling in the estuary. You're trying everything, all tides, different baits, different rigs, and you're just not having success, but other people are catching good fish in that area. So obviously I don't have a lot of information of exactly where you are, but my advice would be to actually do some research and start asking a lot of questions, because you've really got to find out, what are these other guys doing that they're having success? Are you doing the same thing at the moment that they are? Do you know? But you probably need to just ask a lot more questions and just try and get a bit more information if you can find some local fishermen who are willing to share their knowledge. But it would be great, Robbie, if you actually, if you can find out a bit more and then let me know, that would be helpful. If you'd like a free PDF download of some vital keys from today's session, hit the link in the corner or in the description below. I tell you what, I'm going to knock off because the mozzies, it's just that time, just before dark, and the mozzies are going nuts. But I've had a triple treat of flathead. I've got 3 lovely, beautiful eating size flathead on those live mullet, and also a small bream. I'm really happy actually. I could keep fishing, but I've got to get away from these mosquitoes. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. Please let me know in the comments if you've got any questions. I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you really soon.